The storm had not been in the forecast, yet rain came in sheets that blurred the skyline into gray streaks. Blair Evans darted across Fifth Avenue, clutching a folder to her chest, her blazer already soaked through at the shoulders. Her bus had been late, then stalled in traffic, and now she was running for the one meeting that might decide the next 10 years of her life. Horns blared, taxis hissed by, her breath came ragged. She didn't care about the water seeping into her shoes until, halfway across the slick pavement, she heard it. A sharp snap, the heel of her left pump snapping loose. For an instant, she stumbled, nearly falling. Her knee scraped the curb, pain blooming sharp. She could have cursed, could have turned back, but the gleaming tower of Crawford International loomed ahead, 42 stories of glass and steel that did not wait for latecomers or excuses. She kicked the broken shoe aside, slipped the other off, and sprinted barefoot into the revolving doors, hair plastered to her cheeks, folder clamped like a shield. The marble lobby stretched before her, cold and gleaming. People in tailored suits turned to stare. Some smirked, some whispered. One security guard opened his mouth as if to stop her, then thought better of it when she flashed her visitor's badge. She was out of place, and she knew it, but she pressed forward, bare soles slapping against the stone. The elevator ride felt eternal, each floor lighting up too slowly. She tried to breathe, to smooth her hair, to rub the water from her face with a trembling hand. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, she stepped out into silence so thick it pressed against her skin. The conference room waited at the end of a corridor lined with glass, a gallery of power and money. She caught her reflection as she walked, mascara smudged, blazer damp, shoes gone. For one heartbeat she wanted to hide, to flee back into the rain. Instead, she lifted her chin and pushed through the glass doors. The room was a cathedral of authority, a long table of polished oak, walls paneled with smoked glass, a clock ticking loud above the head of the table. A dozen directors turned in unison. Every gaze dropped to her feet. A whisper darted down the line like static. At the head sat Derek D.K. Crawford, the man who had built half the towers she had run past, his presence as solid as the steel beams that bore them. He set down his Mont Blanc pen and looked at her without blinking. "You have 10 minutes, he said, voice low, even, and final. "Convince us, or walk out now and never come back." The ticking of his watch was suddenly unbearable, each second a hammer. Blair swallowed, her throat dry. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to erase the image of a drenched, barefoot girl who didn't belong in their world. 10 minutes to silence the polished laugh already rising from Rebecca Hartwell at the far end of the table. Rebecca, the senior finance director, with her pearl pin and $1,000 heels, smirked openly. She didn't even wear shoes, someone whispered, not softly enough. Heat flushed Blair's neck, but she forced herself to lay the folder on the table as if nothing were wrong. She opened it, revealing pages of sketches and graphs drawn by her own hand ink. Not toner. Old-fashioned, imperfect. But hers. DK raised a hand before she could begin. "Why no shoes?" His tone was not mocking, not yet just probing. Blair hesitated only a breath. "Because broken heels weren't going to break my chance, sir," she said, steady as she could. "I came as I am. Nothing to hide." Silence lingered. DK leaned back, studying her like a puzzle missing a piece. Rebecca's smile thinned further, ready to cut. Blair's chest tightened, but she remembered her mother's voice, years ago in a cramped kitchen. "Don't let them decide your worth, Blair. Walk your own path, even if it's barefoot." She exhaled, straightened her shoulders, and began. "This is a lean snapshot of Q3 West," she said. "Drivers, drag. And where a small correction saves a big number." She clicked the projector. Light flickered, coughed, then went black. The screen behind her died with a faint whine. A murmur stirred around the table, chairs shifting, someone clearing their throat, Rebecca's nails tapping in mock sympathy. "Oh dear," Rebecca said sweetly. "Technical difficulties. What a shame." Blair's stomach lurched. She knew Rebecca's reputation. If there had been a wire to cut or a switch to flip, Rebecca had already found it. She had two choices: freeze and crumble, or fight. Her eyes darted to the whiteboard stretching across the far wall like an empty runway. She seized the marker. "Ladies and gentlemen, technology can fail. Ideas shouldn't." Her hand trembled at first, then steadied as adrenaline surged. Circles, arrows, curves bloomed across the board. Q1 lift promo BOGO. Q2 slump inventory lag plus competitor rebate. Q3 crawl radio buys and field demos slow burn. Her voice grew firmer with every line. She circled the Q2 dip, marked it -30%. It looks like failure until you zoom your aperture. Our competitor bought shelf space and ran rebates bigger than profit margins. That's a sugar high. Then their supply chain hit a snag 2 ports. 3 weeks. Look at Nielsen week 35, you'll see the air pocket. She wrote Nielsen W35 stockout Northwest in block letters. A director leaned forward, pen clicking twice. The room's temperature shifted by a single degree. Rebecca scoffed. Hand-drawn charts are charming, Miss Evans. But this is a quarterly review, not a bake sale. Blair turned, eyes steady. Then let's talk ingredients. Demand latency. We ran 12 weeks of radio in Spokane and Boise. Call-to-quote ratios lagged 4 to 6 weeks normal, when decision-makers hate surprises. We didn't outspend them. We outlasted them. DK's pen scratched once across his pad. Nothing more, but everything. The clock ticked on. 8 minutes left. Blair's pulse thundered, but her breath steadied. She thought of nights mopping diner floors. Of sandals snapping when she was 14 and choosing to keep walking anyway. She planted her bare feet firm on the cold marble. Grounded. Here's Q4, she said, sketching a modest upward slope. No fireworks. No false promises. We keep radio where latency is proven. Cut spend from digital banners selling to bots. And drive field demos on Saturdays. When working families can touch products they trust. Rebecca tilted her head, her tone casual and cruel. Aren't you the assistant? It's unusual for support staff to present strategy. Blair felt eyes weigh her again. She didn't blink. It's unusual to confuse job titles with competence, she replied, before softening her tone. I'm here because I listen to voicemails from customers, to field reps who know the feel of a sale, not just the scent. If you want perfect slides, I'm the wrong girl. If you want results you can measure, this is the path. A chuckle came from the far end. DK's mouth didn't smile, but the line eased. He leaned back. Show me the risk. Don't sell me sunshine. Blair nodded, grateful for something solid. She wrote risks and numbered them. 1. Radio fatigue. Solution rotate scripts. Swap voices. Respect frequency caps. 2. Competitor rebate recovery in late Q4. Solution meet them in one zip code only. Tacoma. 3. Internal fatigue. Solution staggered demos and an overtime budget based on reality, not hope. She underlined hope twice. The room fell quiet, thinking. Behind her, the projector hummed back to life, casting a blue glow. She didn't turn. She let them look at her handwriting. Imperfect but alive. She capped the marker and faced them, barefoot, trembling, but unbroken. That, she said, is why this plan will not just succeed, it will redefine the game. For a second no one moved. Then DK tapped his pen twice on the table. Not applause. Not yet. But interest. Respect. Perhaps. Rebecca's painted smile faltered. Blair caught her own reflection in the glass wall, hair damp, blazer wrinkled, feet bare against marble, and thought, maybe I belong here after all. But deep down she knew, this was only the beginning. Outside those glass walls, the world waited to test her again. Inside. The boardroom smelled of power and fear, and she had walked straight into its center, barefoot and defiant. Rain had always been Blair's omen. Whenever storms broke early over Seattle, something in her life cracked open too. As the boardroom silence pressed against her ribs, her mind slid back uninvited into the earlier storm and into storms much older. She remembered the first time she'd lost her shoes. A memory so ordinary it had become myth in her mind. She was 14. Walking home from a late shift at the corner diner where she bussed tables. The strap of her cheap sandals snapped, sending her stumbling into the wet gutter. She had carried them in her hand the rest of the way, bare feet slapping against pavement, while 2 boys from school passed on bicycles and laughed at her. She'd walked on, chin high, pretending it didn't sting. The sound of their laughter had followed her like a curse. That night, her mother had waited in their cramped kitchen, steam from a pot of ramen fogging the single window. Her mother's voice had been tired but steady. Blair, don't let them decide who you are. Walk your own path. Even if it's barefoot. The words had rooted deep, growing thorns and blossoms both. They rose now, as Rebecca's smirk cut across the boardroom and DK's watch ticked like a metronome of judgment. In that tense chamber of oak and glass, she carried her mother's kitchen inside her, a shield against the polished cruelty of corporate laughter. The flash of memory passed, but more followed in jagged sequence. The bus ride earlier that morning, where an old man in a mariner's cap had nodded kindly as she wrestled her folder from her soaked tote bag. Big day? He'd asked. She had smiled faintly. Maybe the biggest. He had grunted. Rain makes the truth show. That's what my wife always said. At the time she hadn't known what he meant. Now, standing barefoot on the marble, she thought she understood. Water stripped everything bare, makeup, fabric, excuses. She was left with herself, no disguise. Another shard of past surfaced. The morning she'd spotted DK Crawford himself on a downtown crosswalk months ago. He'd been flanked by 2 assistants, moving quickly, phone pressed to his ear. She had nearly collided with him when her sandal strap caught on a crack in the concrete. He had steadied her with one sharp hand, his eyes cold, impatient, then gone without a word. She hadn't known then that she would one day stand in his boardroom, under the full weight of his scrutiny. Fate had a way of circling back like storm drains overflowing after too much rain. Her thoughts flickered further back, to the small apartment where she and her mother had counted coins on a chipped coffee table. Her father had died when she was 10, a garage accident that left them with debts and no cushion. Blair had grown used to patched shoes, second-hand coats, the small humiliations of poverty that became invisible armor. That armor was with her now, invisible under the damp blazer, holding her spine straight as Rebecca's words tried to bend it. She could still hear the laughter from school corridors when kids spotted the duct tape on her sneakers. She had trained herself to listen past it, to the rhythm of her own steps. That rhythm beat in her now bare soles on marble, marker squeaking on whiteboard, voice threading through silence. She remembered the cafe job during college, the way customers in suits looked through her as though she were furniture. Sometimes she scribbled business ideas on napkins while wiping counters, dreams too fragile to speak aloud. One of those napkin-scribbled strategies had, with polish and persistence, become the very plan she was now defending on this whiteboard. The rain outside blurred the city skyline, the boardroom lights reflected cold and steady in the glass. But inside Blair carried her mother's kitchen, the old man's words, the sting of laughter, the weight of napkin dreams. Each fragment formed a spine inside her, invisible but unbreakable. The storm in her memory and the storm on Fifth Avenue braided together, thunder rolling through her chest as she spoke. We didn't outspend them, she told the board, voice gaining ground. We outlasted them. The directors scribbled notes, some leaning closer. The silence shifting from dismissal to consideration. Rebecca tapped her nail in irritation. Her polished calm cracking just slightly. Blair thought of her mother again, how even while illness had begun to hollow her, she had pressed Blair's hand and said, "Don't apologize for surviving, sweetheart. That's the job, to keep going, even when you're soaked to the bone." She realized, with something like awe, that she wasn't just channeling data on a whiteboard. She was translating survival itself into strategy, turning every cheap shoe and broken strap into a case study in resilience. The board might not see it, but she felt it, coursing through her words. The storm outside rattled against the windows. She remembered that Mariners fan's odd phrase, "Rain makes the truth show." In this gleaming fortress of wealth and certainty, her truth stood out drenched, barefoot, unpolished, but undeniable. She wondered if DK heard it too. He watched her without blinking, eyes hooded but not unkind, pen tapping slowly, a rhythm that echoed the beat of her mother's words in her head. Rebecca scoffed again, but the sound rang hollow. Blair finished her point and capped the marker, the smell of ink sharp in her nose. The boardroom was still, waiting for DK to break the silence. But before he could, Blair's memory surged once more back to that first walk home barefoot, the scrape on her knee, the laughter chasing her down the block. She remembered lifting her chin then, pretending not to care, and she realized she wasn't pretending anymore. The girl who had walked on cracked sidewalks barefoot had never really left. She was here, now, standing in a tower of glass, daring to be measured by the same rules that once excluded her. 10 minutes. 10 years. One storm rolling into another. She breathed deeply, the air sharp with anticipation, and waited for whatever came next. Blair stood with the capped marker still in her hand, the faint smell of ink lingering, her pulse loud in her ears. The boardroom remained still, every executive caught between skepticism and curiosity, a silence sharp enough to slice skin. Then Rebecca Hartwell leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, her smile gleaming like a knife polished for ceremony. "Admirable improvisation," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "But clever sketches on a whiteboard won't keep shareholders satisfied. We run numbers here, not folk tales." A few of the directors glanced toward DK, gauging his reaction. He didn't look at Rebecca. He looked at Blair, his face unreadable, the Montblanc pen still between his fingers. Tapping once, twice, then stopping. "Miss Evans," he said at last. His tone even but carrying the weight of finality. "The numbers. What is the risk exposure if your projections fall short?" Blair's stomach tightened. This was the test behind the test. The heart of the storm. She uncapped the marker again, drew 3 neat bullet points beneath the word risks already written, and spoke with steady breath. Risk 1. Radio fatigue. If frequency caps are ignored, our message becomes noise. Solution. Rotate scripts and swap voices every 4 weeks. Use local talent to keep authenticity. Risk 2. Competitor recovery. Their rebates may return in late Q4. Solution. Target one zip code Tacoma so we counter selectively, not across the board. Risk 3. Internal fatigue. Field teams are already stretched. Solution. Stagger demos and build an overtime budget that reflects reality, not hope. She underlined hope twice, pressing hard enough for the squeak to carry across the table. For a moment no one moved, and then one of the older directors with silver hair leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Not bad," he muttered, almost to himself, scribbling in his notes. It was the first fracture in the wall of skepticism. Rebecca caught it too, her smile tightening, and she adjusted her pearl pin as if to remind herself she was still in control. "Tell me, Miss Evans," she said smoothly. "How does a junior assistant," the word drawn out like a sneer, "acquire such strategic insight? Surely you haven't been in any of our planning meetings." The implication was clear. Blair had no right to stand where she was standing. Blair met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "It's unusual," she admitted. "But sometimes being at the margins lets you hear things others miss. I answer phones, I sort voicemails. I hear customers when they don't think anyone is listening. And I listen to the field reps who know the feel of a sale, not just the scent of one. That's where this strategy comes from. Not from titles. From listening." A ripple of discomfort moved along the table. One director coughed, another tapped his pen, but DK's face remained carved from stone, watching Blair with something that might have been appraisal. Rebecca's laugh was soft, almost pitying. "So you're telling us the fate of a multi-million-dollar quarter rests on overheard voicemails and anecdotes? That's charming, Miss Evans. Truly." Blair felt the sting, but she let it settle and spoke before doubt could slip in. "No," she said simply. "It rests on the truth. Data and human voice together. You can ignore one, but not both. If you do, you're blind." The silence that followed was thicker than before. The storm outside lashed against the windows, rain streaking down like vertical scars. Blair planted her bare feet firmer on the marble, drawing strength from their cold steadiness. Somewhere in her chest, a flame burned hotter for every dismissive word Rebecca threw. The clock above DK ticked on, marking time she didn't have. He tapped his pen again. "Miss Evans, show me the bottom line." She nodded, flipped open her folder, and pulled out a page of hand-drawn calculations. Not glossy printouts, not spreadsheets projected onto a screen, just neat handwriting and inked figures. 2.3 million retained revenue by not chasing discounts we can't afford. 900,000 net new from demo conversions improved by 2 points. Conservative, realistic, and measurable in real time. She laid the sheet on the polished oak, sliding it forward. The directors leaned in, scanning it, their pens pausing mid-air. Rebecca's hand twitched, as though she wanted to tear it up but couldn't. DK picked up the page, studied it for a long moment, then set it down. His face betrayed nothing. "You've made your case," he said. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, and the words hung in the air like a verdict. A murmur spread among the directors, low and thoughtful. Blair exhaled, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. Her knees trembled, but she willed them still. The tension broke when the COO cleared his throat. "We'll need supporting documentation," he said gruffly. "By close of business." DK's eyes flicked to Blair. "From you." It was not praise. It was another test, extended like a rope across a chasm. She nodded, her throat dry but her voice steady. "Understood." Chairs scraped, papers gathered, the spell of the room breaking in the small sounds of departure. Rebecca rose last, her smile brittle, her heels clicking like hammers against stone. As she passed Blair, she murmured low enough for only her to hear. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. Shadows come quickly." Blair didn't respond. She packed her folder, gathered the dead clicker from the table, and slid the markers into the tray with deliberate care. DK remained seated as the others filed out. When the last director left, he spoke without looking up. Next time, he said, bring shoes that fit. Blair froze, heat rising to her cheeks, unsure if it was another jab. Then he looked at her, and for the first time his expression shifted by a fraction, the hard lines softening. You did fine without them, he added quietly. But there's no prize for making this place harder than it already island. She almost laughed, caught off guard. Noted, she said. He nodded once, already turning back to his notes, dismissing her as efficiently as he had tested her. Blair stepped into the corridor, the glass walls reflecting her disheveled image back at her. Damp blazer. Mascara faintly smudged, feet bare against the cold marble. She pressed her palm to the cool pane, staring at the rain-streaked skyline beyond. The storm raged on, but inside she carried something steadier. She had stood in the room where power lived, and she hadn't broken. As she turned toward the elevators, her reflection caught her again. For one heartbeat she saw not just the drenched girl who had run barefoot through the lobby, but the girl from years ago who had walked home barefoot on cracked sidewalks, laughter chasing her down the block. Only now, that girl had walked into a fortress of glass and refused to be erased. The storm outside howled, but inside Blair felt a silence she could call her own. This was only the beginning. Shadows would come, as Rebecca promised. But so would light. She pressed the elevator button, heart still racing, and thought. Let the next test come. I'm still standing. The elevator doors slid shut, and Blair let out a long breath, leaning her head against the cool mirrored wall. Her reflection looked back at her hair damp from the storm, blazer wrinkled, mascara smudged into shadows beneath her eyes. Bare feet on marble tiles, a visitor's badge still clipped crooked to her lapel. She looked like someone who had broken into a world where she didn't belong. Yet she was still here. Still moving upward. When the elevator reached the lobby, she stepped out quickly, clutching her folder like a shield. Security guards gave her side glances, but said nothing. The echo of her bare soles across the marble floor carried louder than she wanted. Outside, rain still poured, taxis hissing through puddles, umbrellas bending in the wind. She dashed toward the bus stop, teeth chattering. The adrenaline of the meeting was fading, leaving her body exhausted. She sank onto the wet bench, hugging the folder to her chest, and only then did she realize her hands were shaking. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Emily from HR. Nice work today. Word is DK wants more from you. Keep your head down though Rebecca is furious. Blair stared at the screen, stomach tightening. Furious was an understatement. She could feel Rebecca's disdain even as she sat alone at the bus stop. Shadows come quickly. The words replayed in her mind like a curse. Over the next days, Blair tried to bury herself in work. She answered calls, drafted memos, carried stacks of files from one floor to another. The office smelled of toner and burnt coffee, the rhythm of keyboards clattering in sync. But beneath the hum of ordinary tasks, tension coiled tighter with every passing hour. Colleagues whispered when she passed, eyes darting to her shoes, now a pair of plain black flats she'd bought secondhand. Some offered sympathetic smiles. Others, smirks. She could almost hear the unspoken question. Who does she think she is? On Wednesday, an email hit her inbox with no sender name. Subject line. Imposter. The body was one sentence. The barefoot girl will fall. Her chest tightened as she reread it, then quickly deleted it. Though the words lingered like smoke. Later that evening, as she gathered her bag to leave, she saw the flicker of movement near her desk. Scout, the beagle she'd been fostering from the rescue shelter, had been waiting quietly under her chair all day, nose twitching, tail thumping whenever she looked his way. She smiled, despite herself, crouched down, and scratched behind his ears. Ready to go home, buddy? He wagged harder, but as she reached for her bag, he bolted toward the row of shredders near the copy machines, nose pressed to the floor. Scout. She hissed, hurrying after him in her worn flats. He pawed at a waste bin and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She took it from his mouth, frowning at the jagged edges. Across the top corner was the company letterhead finance department. Scrawled across the page in thick pen were the words, Evans manipulating data unfit for role. Her breath caught. The rest was shredded into strips, but she didn't need more. The handwriting was familiar, sharp and slanted. Rebecca's. Blair folded the fragment carefully and tucked it into her folder. Scout wagged obliviously, proud of his find, while her pulse pounded. Rebecca wasn't just angry, she was planting evidence. The next morning, whispers grew louder. A colleague in accounting avoided her eyes. Another in marketing asked too casually, So, did you really tweak those numbers in your pitch? Blair shook her head, voice firm. No. but doubt lingered in their expressions. At lunch, Emily pulled her aside in the cafeteria, lowering her voice over the clatter of trays. "Be careful," she warned. "Rebecca's saying you cooked projections to impress DK. It's spreading fast." Blair clenched her jaw, staring at her untouched sandwich. "She knows it's not true." Emily's eyes were worried. "Truth doesn't matter as much as perception around here." Blair forced herself to swallow a bite, though it tasted like sawdust. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table. Scout curled at her feet, rain tapping the window pane. She spread out the fragment of paper on the table and traced the jagged tear marks with her finger. Evidence, maybe, but fragile. It wouldn't stand alone. She needed something stronger, something undeniable. Her mother's voice returned like a lighthouse in fog. "Keep going when the lights go out." She whispered it aloud, steadying her breath. The next day, Rebecca struck openly. During a department meeting, in front of 24 employees, she smiled sweetly and said, "Blair, perhaps you'd like to explain your methodology again. Some of us are confused about how you derive numbers without proper access." Blair felt every gaze swing toward her. Heat burned at the back of her neck. She stood, gripping the table's edge, and kept her voice even. The numbers came from public Nielsen reports and customer data available in the call logs. Nothing was fabricated. "I'm happy to share the sources with anyone here." Rebecca tilted her head, lips curved. "Of course, dear. Transparency is so important. I'm sure DK would agree." A few nervous chuckles rose. Blair sat down slowly, heart thundering, but she caught Emily's quick nod of support across the room. After the meeting, Blair walked Scout in the drizzle around the block. He tugged toward every lamppost, nose alive with sense, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Rebecca's words. If Rebecca was bold enough to humiliate her publicly, the real trap must already be set. As she passed the loading dock, she noticed the finance office lights still burning, Rebecca's silhouette bent over her desk. Blair paused, heart racing, then tugged Scout's leash and walked on. She wasn't ready to confront. Not yet. She needed proof that couldn't be denied. That evening, while sorting voicemails, Blair noticed something odd. One message flagged, deleted, still lingered in the server cache. Curious, she played it back. Rebecca's voice, sharp and hurried. "Yes, shred the earlier draft. I'll circulate the clean one. We don't want her fingerprints anywhere near this if the board reviews it." Blair froze. She played it again, hand trembling. Then she saved the file to her secure folder. Evidence. This was bigger than a whisper. This was sabotage. She shut down her computer and held Scout close, his warm fur grounding her. For the first time since she'd run barefoot through the rain into Crawford International, fear coiled into determination. Rebecca had set the rules of this game, but Blair was done playing defense. She would fight not with anger, but with truth. And this time, she would not fight alone. The night stretched long, shadows crawling across Blair's small apartment as rain drummed steadily on the window. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, Scout curled loyally at her feet. The recording of Rebecca's voice played again, crisp and unmistakable. "Yes, shred the earlier draft. I'll circulate the clean one. We don't want her fingerprints anywhere near this if the board reviews it." Each time Blair replayed it, her stomach clenched tighter. This was no longer whispers or innuendo, it was deliberate sabotage, planned and executed. The stakes had shifted. She stared at the waveform on her screen, the peaks and valleys of Rebecca's voice like jagged mountains. This was proof, but proof meant nothing unless it was heard by the right ears. And in Crawford International, those ears belonged to DK. Yet DK was a fortress. He did not grant meetings lightly, and any approach through formal channels risked alerting Rebecca. Blair tapped her fingers against the table, remembering his words after the board meeting. "You did fine without them. But there's no prize for making this place harder than it already island." He had seen her once. Would he see her again, if she dared to knock at his door? She rubbed her temples, exhaustion threatening to smother her, when Scout shifted restlessly and whined, sensing her turmoil. She bent down, buried her face in his fur, and whispered, "I can't back down now, buddy. If I do, she wins." The next morning, Blair arrived at the office early, flats clicking softly against the polished floor. She kept her expression neutral, though her pulse was unsteady. She carried her folder, the fragment of Rebecca's handwritten accusation tucked inside, and on a flash drive in her pocket, the voicemail recording. As employees filtered in, Blair noticed the shift in atmosphere, side glances, murmured conversations cut short when she walked past. Rebecca's rumors had spread like wildfire. At her desk, she opened her computer to find an email flagged urgent. Compliance has requested a review of your projections. Please submit all source material by noon. Her chest tightened. This was Rebecca's move. If she submitted the wrong thing, or if the documents had been tampered with, she could be finished before she even presented her defense. Scout, snoozing under her desk with his nose twitching, stirred as though he sensed danger. Blair reached down, scratching his head, grounding herself. Then she rose, folder in hand, and walked straight to the elevator. The ride to the top floor felt endless, each number lighting up with deliberate slowness. When the doors opened, she stepped into the hushed corridor outside D.K. Crawford's office. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit, looked up from her desk. "Do you have an appointment?" Blair shook her head. "No. But I have information Mr. Crawford needs to hear. It concerns internal sabotage." The assistant studied her for a long moment, expression unreadable, then pressed a button on her phone. A muted conversation followed. Finally, she nodded once. 5 minutes. Don't waste them. Blair's palms were damp as she entered DK's office. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slick city, steel and glass stretching toward gray skies. DK sat behind a desk that looked carved from stone, his presence as immovable as ever. He didn't stand. "Miss Evans," he said flatly. "You have 5 minutes. Speak." Blair set the folder on his desk, her voice low but steady. "Sir, there's an effort to discredit me. To discredit the strategy I presented. I believe it's deliberate, orchestrated by Rebecca Hartwell." His gaze sharpened, though his expression remained stone. "Those are serious words. Do you have proof? Or only suspicion?" Blair pulled the flash drive from her pocket, set it beside the folder. A voicemail, recovered from the system. Her voice instructing someone to shred drafts to erase my work. And this? She opened the folder, sliding forward the fragment Scout had uncovered. Her handwriting, accusing me of manipulating data. Torn from a document in the finance office. DK leaned back, fingers steepled, his eyes flicking from the evidence to her face. "And why bring this to me directly? Compliance handles disputes." Blair met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Because if I went through compliance, she'd know. And by the time it reached your desk, the truth might already be buried. You told me once not to make things harder than they already are. Sir, I think silence would make this harder for all of us." For the first time, DK's mask shifted slightly. He reached for the flash drive, turning it between his fingers, weighing it. "You're either reckless," he said slowly, "or very certain." "Both," Blair admitted. The silence that followed was thick. Rain streaked the glass behind him. Finally, DK pressed a button on his desk phone. "Bring in IT. I want this recording verified." Minutes later, a technician arrived, loaded the file, and played it through speakers. Rebecca's voice filled the room. "Yes, shred the earlier draft. I'll circulate the clean one. We don't want her fingerprints anywhere near this if the board reviews it." The words hung in the air like poison. The technician looked up. "Authentic. No signs of editing." DK nodded once, dismissing him. When they were alone again, he tapped the fragment of paper with one finger. "This handwriting, how did you get it?" Blair hesitated, then told the truth. "Scout, my foster dog, found it near the shredders. I kept it." For the first time, DK almost smiled, though it was brief and humorless. Resourceful animal. He rose, walking to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Rebecca has been with this company for 15 years. She has influence, allies, a history of results. Accusing her is like setting fire to dry timber. It burns fast, and not always the way you want." Blair's heart pounded. "I don't want fire. I want truth. If she can sabotage me, she can sabotage anyone." DK turned, his gaze weighing her like a balance scale. "You'll need more than fragments and a voicemail. You'll need timing, precision, and patience. Do you understand?" She nodded, though nerves trembled in her chest. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long beat, then said quietly, "Then be ready. The board reconvenes in 2 weeks. If you want justice, that's your arena. Until then, keep silent. Not a word to anyone, including Emily." Blair's breath caught. "Why Emily?" His eyes darkened. "Because Rebecca has ears everywhere." He sat again, dismissing her with the smallest nod. "5 minutes are up, Miss Evans. Go." Blair gathered her folder, her heart racing, and left the office. As the elevator descended, Scout's words, or what she imagined he might say, echoed in her head. Trust is thin ice, step carefully. When she returned to her desk, Emily was waiting. Concern etched on her face. Where were you? You missed compliance's deadline. Blair forced a steady voice. I'll handle it. Don't worry. Emily studied her. Uncertain, but didn't press. Scout nudged her leg under the desk, eyes warm and knowing. Blair stroked his head, forcing her breath calm. The storm was far from over. Rebecca's shadow stretched longer every day. But Blair had planted her first seed of truth in DK's office, and seeds had a way of breaking through stone if given time. She whispered to herself, a vow carried by the rhythm of rain outside. I'll see this through. Barefoot if I have to. Weeks passed like the slow tightening of a noose. The storm outside the city had broken, but inside Crawford International, pressure built with each passing day. Blair moved carefully, speaking little, keeping her head down as DK had ordered. Yet every step through the gleaming hallways felt like walking across glass, the weight of eyes on her, whispers trailing like smoke. Rebecca glided through the office with polished confidence, heels clicking like metronomes of control, her smile sweet as arsenic. She greeted directors with warmth, laughed in elevators, carried herself like the inevitable winner. But Blair could feel the undercurrent. Rebecca was watching her, waiting for her to stumble. Scout, ever loyal, sensed her unease. At night he sat close by her chair as she worked late, his head resting on her foot, as if tethering her to courage. The fragment of paper and the recording remained locked in her folder, secrets heavy as iron. She waited, building quiet strength, knowing the board meeting would be her battlefield. The day arrived under a pale sky, the city washed clean from rain. Blair dressed in her simplest suit, hair tied back, shoes plain but firm. She carried her folder, heart hammering, and walked through the tower's lobby with calm steps, though every instinct screamed at her to run. On the 42nd floor, the boardroom gleamed like a cathedral again, polished oak and smoked glass reflecting solemn faces. The directors filed in, Rebecca among them, her pearl pin gleaming, her expression the perfect balance of concern and superiority. DK entered last, setting his Mont Blanc pen on the table with deliberate precision. The clock ticked, steady as ever. The meeting began with routine reports, figures, projections, voices droning with practiced rhythm. Blair waited, palms damp against her folder, until DK's voice cut through. Next item. Q3 review and corrective strategy. His gaze moved to Blair. Miss Evans. You will present. The words hung like a gauntlet. A flicker of irritation crossed Rebecca's face. But she masked it quickly, arranging her papers with a smile. Blair rose, the weight of the room pressing on her shoulders, but her voice held steady. She began with numbers, charts drawn by hand again, bold strokes on the whiteboard. She spoke of risks and solutions, of demand latency and field demos, of truth measured not in slogans but in results. The directors listened, some leaning forward, pens paused. Rebecca interrupted with calculated sweetness. Interesting, Miss Evans. But surely you can't expect us to gamble millions on your improvised methods. Numbers must be verifiable, not stories scribbled in marker. Blair turned, meeting her gaze evenly. Agreed. Which is why I've brought verifiable evidence today. She reached into her folder and placed the flash drive on the table, sliding it forward. This contains a voicemail recovered from the system cache. It's a recording of Miss Hartwell instructing staff to shred drafts and circulate altered documents tied to my work. The room stilled, air sucked from it like a sudden vacuum. Rebecca's face remained smooth, but her eyes sharpened, a flash of steel beneath glass. DK's gaze locked on Blair. Play it, he ordered. The technician, already present, loaded the file. Rebecca's voice filled the boardroom, cold and hurried. Yes, shred the earlier draft. I'll circulate the clean one. We don't want her fingerprints anywhere near this if the board reviews it. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. A director muttered. Good Lord. Another scribbled furiously in his notes. Rebecca's smile flickered, but she straightened, voice icy. This proves nothing. A fragment taken out of context. Easily doctored. Blair didn't flinch. She laid the torn paper fragment on the table, the jagged edges stark against polished oak. Her handwriting. Accusing me of manipulating data. Found near the shredders. Rebecca's composure cracked for the first time. Her lips tightened, her knuckles white on her pen. Anyone could have planted that. She snapped. This is absurd. DK's voice cut through. quiet but final. Enough. He leaned back, eyes sweeping the boardroom. The evidence stands. Authenticity has already been verified. His gaze landed on Rebecca, unblinking. Sabotage within this company is unacceptable. Deliberate attempts to discredit colleagues are grounds for termination. Effective immediately, Rebecca Hartwell is relieved of her duties. The words dropped like stones into still water. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of a chair. Rebecca stood, trembling with fury beneath her polished mask. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I built half of what you stand on." DK's expression never changed. "And you've just torn it down." Security entered quietly. Rebecca gathered her papers with shaking hands, her pearl pin catching the light one last time before she swept from the room, heels striking like hammers. The door shut, leaving silence in her wake. Blair stood frozen, breath shallow, the weight of the moment pressing her into the floor. DK broke the silence. "Miss Evans," he said, voice steady. "You may sit." She did, legs trembling beneath the table. The directors murmured among themselves, some nodding, some skeptical, but the tide had turned. Blair had not just survived, she had forced truth into the open. The meeting continued, though every word after felt like aftershocks. When it finally ended, and the boardroom emptied, DK remained. He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You've made enemies today, but you've also made something rarer. You've made yourself undeniable." Blair swallowed hard, emotion rising in her throat. "I only told the truth." DK nodded once. "That's the hardest thing to do in this building." He gathered his papers, stood, and paused at the door. "Don't squander it. You've been given a place at this table. Earn it. Every day." Then he was gone, leaving the room vast and quiet. Blair sat alone, the whiteboard still marked with her hand-drawn lines, the torn fragment and flash drive resting before her. Scout's face flashed in her mind, the loyal dog who had uncovered the evidence. She smiled faintly, tears pricking her eyes. She had walked barefoot into a storm, and though the marble floor was cold, she had not broken. As she rose and gathered her things, she pressed her palm against the glass wall, looking out over the city washed clean by rain. For the first time, the skyline didn't seem distant or untouchable. It felt like something she could walk into, step by step, even barefoot if she must. The storm had stripped her bare, but it had also revealed her strength. Justice had not come easily, but it had come. And for Blair Evans, it was only the beginning.